Welcome to the channel. Today's story is full of surprises and real drama. Subscribe and like to stay updated. Let's dive in.
The flight back was rough. The plane shook so much that the seatbelt sign stayed on the whole time. There was no drink service, and unless you sat by the restroom, you couldn't use it. The pilot called it some turbulence, but I'd hate to see what he considers serious. When we finally landed, I thought I'd see my husband, Alex, and the kids waiting outside security. Maybe they had car trouble, but I couldn't understand why they hadn't called. I grabbed my phone from my bag, but there was no signal. So I headed to baggage claim to grab my suitcase. After pulling it off the carousel, there was still no sign of them. I went outside to the pickup area, scanning the crowd for Alex's car. After waiting about 20 minutes, I decided to find a payphone and call Alex's cell. But instead of him picking up or going to voicemail, I got a number unknown message. I figured Skylink had messed up again, so I tried calling our home number. This time I heard, "This number is no longer in service." Now I was furious. Alex must have switched phone carriers and completely forgotten to tell me exactly the kind of thing that thoughtless idiot would do. He probably thought he was saving a few bucks by switching, but wouldn't bother letting anyone know, leaving me to sort out the mess. He was definitely going to get an earful when I finally got home. By now, 45 minutes had passed and I wanted to get home, so off to the first rapid ride counter I went. It was there I found out none of my credit cards worked. The clerk said they were all cancelled. With only $50 in cash, I set out to find an ATM. When I finally located one, I got my next unpleasant surprise. We usually kept a couple of thousand in the account, but the ATM showed only $150. I withdrew the entire amount and caught a cab home. About 30 minutes later, the cab pulled up in front of my house, which was completely dark with no signs of life. My car was in the driveway, but something was off. It didn't have any license plates. My heart sank when I saw a notice on it from the leasing company stating it had been repossessed. I loved that Mercedes. What had my idiot husband done now? I let him handle our finances and pay the bills, but how had he managed to screw things up this badly? We both earned good money. I was a junior partner at a successful law firm, after all. I looked at my status symbol house. All the windows and doors were covered with plywood, and there was a notice nailed to the front door indicating the bank had foreclosed. My life was coming apart. I trusted my husband to handle these things. It looked as if I was going to be required to take overall responsibility now. I'd have my PA handle all this. Now I'll teach Alex to mess up and inconvenience me this way. As I was standing there, the neighbors from across the street, Hannah and Liam, walked over. They explained that my husband and children had moved out 4 weeks ago and left me this envelope. I had spent the last 3 weeks with my boyfriend, pretending to be at a conference in Portland. I opened the envelope, and it contained 2 letters. The first one I opened was from my children. My girls said they were moving away with their dad because he had always loved them and I was always working and too busy for them. They wished me good luck. Neither of them signed a love to the letter. The second letter was in Alex's handwriting. It listed a storage locker with a key taped to it. A receipt indicated the locker was paid for a month. He said all my belongings were there. My neighbors let me use their phone. I called a girlfriend of mine, Sophie, and explained my predicament. She agreed to pick me up and let me stay with her a few days until I could get back on my feet. While I was waiting for my ride, I started getting very mad. I was a damn good lawyer. I was going to make my husband pay, and pay dearly for all this. My current boyfriend was also an attorney at the same firm. He was a partner and very powerful. He'd help me. I was the best lay he ever had. That's why I started sleeping with him in the first place. His power at the firm. Now I must admit that I was drawn to his aura of power. He dressed in $10,000 suits, his home was in an exclusive neighborhood, and people bowed to him. The only drawback was that he was a very selfish lover. He could care less about my feelings as long as he got off. All I was to him was eye candy, a beautiful, well-built woman to have on his arm, someone to show off to his friends, someone to brag about, someone to degrade. I can't remember having him ever give me any climax. Why did I stay with him? He promised to divorce his wife when the time was right and I would take her place. That's why I put up with his gross behavior. He was worth some serious money, and I would not sign a prenup unless I wrote it. Sophie finally pulled up with her boyfriend, Mike. He helped load my suitcase in her car, and off we went. I could tell by the way Mike was talking that he thought he was going to get lucky and be part of a threesome. Boy, was he going to be disappointed. I really didn't see what Sophie saw in that loser, but she did tell me that he had a big tool once. When we finally arrived at Sophie's apartment, she got me settled in the guest bedroom. I got on the phone to my boyfriend. We communicate via disposable cell phones so that there's no record of our calls. As expected, his call went to voicemail, but he called me back when he was free of his wife. I left him a very detailed message of what my husband was trying to do. About 5 minutes later, Sophie informed me that a man was on her phone for me. I identified myself, and then my boyfriend went off on me. It seems that when he got home from his trip, his wife had packed up his things and put them on the front lawn. She had thrown him out. He was staying at his club until he got an apartment. She also had him served with divorce papers, reason adultery. And guess who was named as the other party? She even had pictures of us in various motels having sex. He said that he never wanted to see me again because it was my entire fault for not keeping my husband in line. I guess my husband's revenge was spreading. I felt a twinge of pride in Alex for what he had the courage to do. It was just a twinge. I was still going to make him pay. My now former lover hung up. I started to break down. Sophie and Mike helped me for the next couple of hours and tried to cheer me up. I cried myself to sleep on the couch. I couldn't believe how badly I had screwed up. Tuesday morning, I started putting together a plan to get my husband and family back. I knew deep down that he loved me and I would manipulate those feelings to my benefit. It would be just a repeat of 12 years earlier when I first met him. My mind drifted back to those early years. I met my husband, Alex, when we were juniors at Northern Academy. One of my girlfriends pointed him out to me as a good catch. She said he was very bright and would probably be rich someday. He wasn't athletic but had a pretty decent body and was kind of cute in a nerdy way. I proceeded to check him out over the next few weeks. I found that he was a business major with a computer minor, that's why the nerdy appearance. He was on a full scholarship and carried a 4.0 average. He didn't really date. To make matters even better, there were a couple of businesses trying to get him to sign on with them before he even graduated. I was impressed because we were still juniors and businesses didn't usually recruit until just before graduation. My parents were successful. My father was the head of a medium-sized law firm, and my mother was enjoying the benefits of his success. It was decided that I would go to law school and become an attorney in my father's firm. It was either that or get a job right out of high school. I may be a natural blonde, but I was far from stupid. I picked law school. After my freshman year, I realized that a lot of the girls were not trying for a degree, but actually trying to land a husband to provide them with a good life. As I thought about it, I didn't think that was such a bad idea, so I became a real party girl. I kept it cool on my campus, but when there were parties at nearby schools, I went and partied hard. I can remember the first time I woke up in a frat house. I was in a bedroom on a mattress on the floor in one of the rooms. There was a guy sleeping on either side of me, and all three of us were without clothes. If it wasn't for the nasty headache, I wouldn't have minded waking up like that all the time. I managed to get up without waking them. I couldn't find any of my clothes in the room, so I took off for the bathroom. I didn't care, I had to go. If you know anything about fraternities, you know that they're usually set up in very large, old homes. This one was no exception. The bedrooms were on the second and third floors, with a bathroom on each floor. I was on the third floor. The bedroom I was in was on one end of the hall, and the bathroom was on the other end. I debated with myself whether I should make the run down the hall like this or look for something to cover up with. The need to pee won, and I was off, running down the hall. When I got to the bathroom, I discovered it was not what I expected. It had been converted from a regular bathroom to something more appropriate for a large group of guys. There were 2 toilets with no enclosures, just sitting along one wall, a couple of urinals on another wall, a few sinks, and a large shower room. I guess guys just didn't need the same level of privacy we women did. There I was, sitting on one of the toilets, getting rid of last night's beer when the door opened and in walked a guy. He paid no attention to me and walked up to one of the urinals and let go. I had nothing else to do but watch him. Actually, he was kind of cute and wearing a towel around his neck, that was all. I couldn't help but notice that he had a pretty good body. It might have interested me at another time, but right now my head hurt too badly. I finished my business but continued to sit there. I felt as if I had to get a little better just to die. He finished and was standing at one of the sinks, going through his shaving kit. The next thing I knew, he was standing in front of me with a glass of water and some pills. I got a real close and personal look at him, thinking, not bad, maybe he'll ask me out sometime. He said, "Here, take these, they'll help with the hangover." I knew from the shape that they weren't aspirin and just looked at him. He took one of the pills and after swallowing it, said, "Just prescription painkillers." I took the other pill. He went back to the sink, brushed his teeth, and shaved. By the time he was finished, I was starting to feel a little better. It then dawned on me that I was without any clothes and it was having no effect on him. He was treating me as if I was one of the guys. I assumed he was not interested in girls. I wiped, flushed, and walked up to the mirror over the sink next to his. I almost screamed at the image looking back at me. No wonder I didn't affect him, I looked like hell. My hair was a mess and my makeup was all over my face. I looked like a real street hooker. I asked the guy if he knew where I could get a towel and stuff so I could take a shower. He reached into his shaving kit, handed me a bar of soap and a small hotel shampoo bottle, and said we'd share his towel. I said thank you. He then went into the shower room and turned on a few of the shower heads. I waited by the sink, trying to feel a little more human before joining him in the shower. I finally entered the shower. It felt great. After what seemed like a week, but was actually just a couple of minutes, I felt his hands washing my hair. I was startled at first, but then, remembering he was not into girls, I relaxed and enjoyed his hands. He rinsed my hair and then turned me around to face him. With a washcloth, he cleaned my face and commented that I was looking good. And I must admit, I was enjoying all the feelings. It felt so good, I suddenly realized that he was standing before me, so I just started kissing him. Soon, I was having sex with him. I guess he was into girls somehow. I found myself on my back on the tile floor of the showers with him having sex with me. I opened my eyes and found 4 other guys in the shower, watching us. Before I could react, the next guy was on me. I just enjoyed all the feelings he was giving me. For about the next hour, I enjoyed all 4 of them. To make a long story short, I spent the weekend there. I never found my clothes, but running around with all those guys was a real turn-on. To be exact, I had sex with most of the guys that lived there. Wednesday morning, wearing some guy's sweats, I was dropped off at my dorm. I was so sore, but I was smiling from ear to ear. I spent the next 3 years visiting that frat on every long weekend. I was their plaything. I never wore a stitch of clothing while I was in their house. I was a very happy girl. In my junior year, I decided that I needed a steady boyfriend. One reason was to have him handy for parties and stuff, another reason was to kill the rumor around my campus that I liked girls and someone to show off to my parents when they visited. Well, Alex was the perfect subject, so I began my campaign. He was so easy, he really didn't know anything about women. I didn't even have to sleep with him before he was following me around like a puppy. I played the virgin role to a.t. He was an okay kisser, but he really didn't excite me. I was still doing all those guys at another campus frat, they satisfied my needs. We became a couple in our senior year. He was a very happy guy. For my part, I taught him all the things I liked during sex. He was a quick learner and I was a happy girl. I kept telling him I wanted to be a virgin on my wedding night to keep him from wanting more. Like I said earlier, he was easy to control. We graduated and moved on. I was off to law school and he was off to another school for his master's and PhD. While I had him trained exactly the way I wanted, I figured he would probably find another girl and make her very happy. I felt I would never see him again. The next time I saw him was 6 years later. I had passed my bar and was a very junior attorney in a very large firm. While I wasn't exactly sleeping my way up the corporate ladder, I wasn't exactly trying not to either. I just had too much competition from other women trying the exact same tactic. Anyway, I was assigned to a team that had the goal to help a new business incorporate and grow. We didn't have the job yet, we were just going to give them a song and dance about how great we were and how we could help them. I was just there as eye candy because I had never done this before. Imagine my surprise when one of the senior attorneys ushered in our meeting with the prospective client. It was my old boyfriend, Alex. He looked around the room and then saw me. His smile lit up the room and he put both arms out to me and started walking over. I knew that I could get his business if no one else screwed up the presentation. We hugged and kissed and then explained to the rest of the room that we were college buddies. My supervisor studied me. I winked at him. We had Alex's business before the afternoon was out. I made sure my supervisor and the senior attorney knew that it was because of me they got the business. I had started my climb up the corporate ladder. I was assigned to Alex's project not as anything important, but just to keep the client happy. So I started to see if I could still wrap him around my little finger. We met for lunch the next day. Our stated reason was to catch up on our lives since college. My real reason was to see if he still had it for me. He told me he finished his master's and PhD and started a computer software company with a buddy. He hadn't dated since the two of us parted company 5 years ago. He said his business was successful and making money faster than they could spend it. Alex also said that he missed me. I explained to him that I had dated a few guys while I was in law school, but nothing clicked. I also brought him up to date with my career as a lawyer, noting that I had no relationships at present. As lunch was finishing, I told him that I had missed him too. From the look on his face when I said that, I knew he was mine to control again. The project continued along at a rapid pace. If Alex had any problems with what we were proposing, I just smiled my best smile at him and he wilted. During these meetings, I found out that Alex's little company was worth some serious money and that it was the best in their field. I never really understood their business, but it was making a lot of money. I found out that Alex was a multimillionaire. I was called into one of the partners' offices a few weeks later. There were 5 of the senior partners there. They congratulated me on my part in winning Alex's business for the firm, and then they started grilling me. It was as if I was taking an oral bar exam again. When the questions stopped, they told me that they were happy with my answers and asked if I would like to be more involved with some of their other clients. What they wanted was for me to be the firm's eye candy when needed. I accepted. All my legal training notwithstanding, I was really being paid to look good and flirt with the more important clients. I realized that this job wouldn't last forever, so I set my sights on Alex. Since his company was over 500 miles from where I worked, Alex and I communicated via email and phone calls. Whenever he came into town, I made sure we were inseparable. If something needed his signature or approval, I was on the next plane to his location. To save costs, I stayed in his home. It was huge. My guest room was a 2-bedroom suite with its own bath and hot tub. I could get used to this lifestyle. After a little maneuvering by me, Alex soon professed undying love for me and wished we could be together forever. I had been taking inventory of him these last months. He was attractive, well-built, well-dressed, educated, and very rich. What more could a girl want? The one thing I didn't know was how he was at intercourse. I had told him when we were in college that I wanted to remain a virgin until I married. Well, he remembered that and never really tried anything with me, so I had to plan a way to seduce him. I couldn't just jump his bones as it wouldn't fit with my image. I didn't want him to find out that I was really experienced at 29. After all, I was the main attraction at a lot of gangbangs and I liked it. So, my plans were made. I gave up any sex so that I would tighten up a little. Now, I knew I couldn't regrow a hymen, but I could blame its loss on horseback riding when I was a kid, if he noticed. I was such a devious person. About 2 months later, my plans came together. I was at his house to get some papers signed when a winter snowstorm hit hard. All the roads were impassable and the airport was closed. I was staying at his house when I began his seduction. First, I took off the jacket to my business suit. I had made sure that I was wearing a very thin and very clingy blouse with no bra underneath. He had trouble keeping his eyes on my face after that. I could see him start to sweat. He prepared a simple dinner for us. I liked the guy that cooked. After dinner, we were sitting in his study, talking, when I decided to take it up another notch. I accidentally spilled my drink down the front of my blouse. By the time I got done, it looked like I was starring in a wet shirt contest. His mouth fell open, and he stared. I let him look for a while before breaking the spell and asking for a shirt or something to wear. He blushed and escorted me to his bedroom closet, telling me to select anything I needed. He then politely left the room so I could change. Now, Alex is 6 feet 2 inches and I'm only 5 feet 4 inches, so his shirts covered me completely, but that wasn't what I wanted. I wanted one that showed me off a little so I could continue my seduction. I finally found one that had an open neck and just barely covered my behind. I checked myself out in his full-length mirror, bending and stretching so I could see what I would be showing him. I liked what I saw and returned to his study. Upon entering the study, I noticed that he had started a fire. I love the smell of a wood fire and the feeling of its warmth. About that time, all the lights went out. Alex commented that this happened anytime there was a bad storm. It was usually a tree taking down the power lines. I pulled a few pillows off the couch, placed them in front of the fire, and lowered myself down. Alex joined me. I pulled myself over to him and gave him a long, loving kiss. I then climbed onto his lap and curled up on him. I loved cuddling with him, it just felt right. I guess that I fell a little in love with him then, but soon, I mentally slapped myself alongside the head and snapped out of my daze. It was back to my plan. Alex was rubbing my back and holding me closely. I raised my head and put my arms around his neck. I felt the shirt creep up some more. I kissed him again, this time with everything I could muster. I pushed back on him until he was on the floor and I was on top. I wiggled and kissed him. A few minutes later, we were having sex. We were lying there, recovering, when I noticed he was crying. He kept saying that he was so sorry for taking my virginity before my wedding. I told him that I loved him and it was my gift to him. As I lay there holding him, comforting him, and drying his tears, a little voice in the back of my mind said, "Hook, bait, and sinker." We were married 3 months later. At his suggestion, and let's face it, nagging, I went off the pill. We had a beautiful baby girl about a year later. Our second child was a boy, born about 3 years after that. I went back on the pill. 2 kids were enough, let's face it, I was too self-centered to enjoy motherhood. Alex had enough money, so I hired a nanny. She took over the day-to-day raising of the children. That left me the free time I needed to go back to work. I started with a local law firm. About a year later, the local firm merged with my old firm. Since all the senior managers knew me, I was placed in charge of the local office. I was required to visit the home office about once a month to report and be updated. On my out-of-town trips, I used the opportunity to start my sex parties again. They were great. I usually had between 4 and 6 guys at a time. Some of the parties also included another woman. At first, the thought of another woman going down on me freaked me out, but after it happened, I actually enjoyed it a lot. Soon, I was returning the same favor to her. Now, I don't want you to think that I was neglecting my husband. With him, it was completely different. He would hold me and make tender love to me and cuddle afterward. It was nice, but it wasn't as exciting as my monthly sex parties. I was a selfish woman. I wanted my husband and my affairs. My children came in a distant third. As I moved up the corporate ladder, Alex began to spend more and more time at home with the children. He arranged his work schedule so that he could be there with the children when they got up in the morning, put them on the bus for school, and be there waiting when the bus dropped them off. Eventually, he moved his office to our home so that he could be there with the children. He let the nanny go and took over everything. As the kids got older, he did all their after-school stuff. Me? Well, I was always too busy to attend. I don't remember when it happened, but my kids stopped inviting me to their events and soon stopped telling me about them altogether. I guess it really came to a head when I returned from a home office visit to find my son with a cast on his arm. When I asked him what happened, he said he fell off his bike. His cast had signatures from all his friends, his father, and his sister. When I asked if I could sign it, I was told, "That's okay, Mom, there's no room." That hurt a lot. But what hurt even more was the fact that no one had bothered to call me and tell me about the accident. It felt as if I no longer belonged in their lives, or even worse, that they no longer wanted me in their lives. I resolved to spend more time with my husband and family, but things kept coming up at work, and I refused to give up my trips to the home office. After a particularly bad weekend with Sophie and her boyfriend, I arrived at my office only to find one of the managing partners waiting for me. He was not happy and had chartered a private jet to see me instead of the usual greetings and small talk. He started right in. "We have been informed that you and Peter Brown, my office boyfriend, have been carrying on an affair for at least 3 years, and that you have also been conducting monthly sex parties with numerous individuals since you started at this firm. When you started with this company, you signed a contract. In that contract, there was a morals clause. We held a senior partners meeting this weekend, and it was decided that your contract would be terminated. As of now, you are no longer employed by our firm. Your personal belongings are being packed and will be delivered to the address you give me. Here is a check for the money we owe you. We will not be giving you any severance or recommendations." And then he added, "Mr. Brown has been terminated as well. His conduct, along with yours, will be reported to the bar's disciplinary committee. You both will probably be disbarred." I fainted. When I came to, I called my friend Sophie to pick me up. After I finished the call, security walked me outside and informed me not to return. I thought my life had hit bottom. Little did I know how wrong I was. Sophie picked me up and took me back to her apartment. My final paycheck was about $700. There wasn't much I could do with that. Back at Sophie's apartment, I called my husband's company. A very nice young lady told me that he no longer worked there. I lost it and started calling her stupid. I said, "He's one of the owners, you idiots." She politely told me that the company had been sold to a larger company about 4 months ago, and my husband had retired. My next call was to the family attorney my husband used. He confirmed all my fears. My loving husband had taken off with my children and all his money. The last time the attorney checked, my husband was worth a little over $97 million. He also added that my husband, children, and all his assets had disappeared. He mentioned that he had been receiving calls from various collection agencies regarding my debts and needed an address for me so he could tell them how to contact me. He also suggested that I hire an attorney. I finally called my mother and father to ask for help. My father answered. He refused to talk to me but put my mother on. She explained that Alex and the kids had stopped by 2 weeks ago in his private jet to say goodbye before flying off to an island in the South Pacific. No, she didn't know which island. Alex had explained what I had done to them. He even left them DVDs, audio recordings, and a private investigation firm's report detailing all my transgressions. She said my dad never wanted to see me or speak to me again after seeing one of the DVDs. I asked if Mom could send me some money because Alex had left me nothing. She said she'd discuss it with my father and call me back. About an hour later, she called and asked for my address. A FedEx driver gave me an overnight envelope the next day. The envelope contained a check for $4,700. When I called to say thank you, I was informed that their number had been changed and the new number was unlisted. Well, here I was living in Dallas about 8 months later. I had used the money my folks had sent me to move down here with all my stuff and buy a small used car. I rented a small furnished apartment and had started looking for work. Nobody wanted to hire a 37-year-old woman with no resume. The only offers I had were for clerking and other entry-level positions. One afternoon, my junker car died in front of a gentleman's club. It was an upscale club, it even had parking attendants. One of the attendants was trying to start my car when a limo pulled up. Out popped one of my old law firm's clients. He recognized me right off because he was part of one of my sex parties and asked me how I was doing. I guess I broke down at that point because the next thing I remember was sitting in the back seat of his limo. I was crying as I told him about my husband, my children, and my job. I explained that I was having no luck finding a job and was almost out of money. He asked if I was still doing the sex parties and if I'd accept payment for one. I nodded yes. He took me into the club and we walked back to the manager's office. Soon, I was in a small bedroom, naked and being serviced by a steady stream of guys. I loved it. When the guys finally ran out, I was allowed to clean up in the dancers' dressing room. The girls in the room were all young and pretty. They were in their prime. They looked at me with knowing eyes. They knew what I had been doing. I took a shower, cleaned up, and dressed. The manager called me into his office and gave me an envelope containing $2,100. He then arranged with me for another party in 2 weeks. The only difference was that this one would be in the evening and held on a Friday and Saturday. I needed the money, so I agreed. That night, I cried myself to sleep thinking about how far I had fallen. I was no more than a high-priced hooker. During the next 2 months, I had 6 parties. One afternoon, the club manager asked if I wanted to do a party at a private residence. He said that this one would pay $4,700 for the night. My self-esteem was so far down that I accepted without even asking what the party would involve. I was only interested in the money. The night of the party, I was picked up at the club by a limo. Once underway, the limo driver informed me that I was to be without clothes when I arrived. Since the windows were blacked out and no one could see in, I started getting undressed. When I was done, the driver asked for my clothing and gave me a pair of very high heels. He then closed the partition and I was unable to see where we were going. The ride lasted almost an hour before we stopped. I was hustled out of the car and into a side entrance. While I didn't get a good look at the house, I had the impression of some real wealth. I was introduced to a maid who took charge of me. Linda led me into a room that appeared to be a massage setup. I was told to take a shower and get cleaned up. After I climbed under the shower, the maid came in. She walked up to me and started cleaning everything I had. There was nothing sexual about what she was doing. After she had me completely clean, she dried me and led me to the massage table. She then powdered me, added a subtle scent, and did my hair in a soft ponytail. For the finishing touches, she put diamond wrist and ankle bracelets on me. She then completed the entire ensemble with a beautiful diamond choker. She stood me in front of a full-length mirror. I looked as beautiful as I did 15 years ago. She led me out of the room and upstairs. When we entered the ballroom, I was surprised to find about 20 couples. The women were in formal gowns and the men were all in tuxes. I stood out as Linda walked me over to a very elegantly dressed, grey-haired gentleman. He spoke with a slight accent that I couldn't quite place. He introduced himself as my host and master for the evening. His wife complimented me on my beauty. I was walked around the ballroom and people were introduced to me. They ran their hands across my body. I was starting to get excited. It seemed that I always had a glass of champagne with me and I was starting to get a little woozy. I'm not sure how it happened, but I found myself tied to a pole on a small stage. There was a rubber ball in my mouth, held there by leather straps. I couldn't make a sound. Then, the lights were turned on me. My host was saying that I had agreed to be the entertainment for the evening. I did not like it, but that was my fate. One time, a guy a few months ago was a little too rough and I couldn't sit correctly for about a week. Where was my husband Ethan to save me? I screamed for him to save me, then I remembered how I treated him. He was gone. I was used and I just screamed. They kept using me. At times, mercifully, I used to faint. After one such night, I opened my eyes. I was staring up at the ceiling, the lights were on. I tried to move my arms, they were tied down. Fear crept into my heart. What were they going to do to me now? I was almost in a full panic when someone walked into the room. I started to scream when a nurse wrapped her arms around me and said, "You're safe now. No one will hurt you here. You're in a hospital." She explained to me that someone had dropped me off at the emergency room entrance a week ago. I had been in a coma since. I started to cry. They must have given me something because I didn't wake up until the next day. The first people to descend on me were the doctors. There were all kinds of specialists examining all my injuries. Next up came the shrink to help me. He talked to me about my feelings and fears. We talked for many hours. He promised we'd talk again, and talk we did, for weeks. Suddenly, I realized that I was in a private room being tended to by some very expensive doctors in a private hospital. Who was paying for all this care? I did not have health insurance. I asked my shrink about the cost and payment. He looked at me and said, "Your husband." I told him, "I don't have a husband anymore." He spent the next few hours listening to me pour my heart out. I told him everything, my cheating, putting myself first over my husband and children, how my husband had left me destitute, and my descent into prostitution. When I finally stopped, he commented, "He must still love you." I just looked at my doctor. I must have had the dumbest look on my face. He just nodded at me. My talk with him today and my opening up to all my faults and transgressions was a real beginning, he said. He told me that at our next meeting, we'd explore further. We continued our daily talks for the next 6 months. He helped me understand myself and my actions. I started to grow as a person. I finally started to be a caring adult, not the spoiled child I always was. One day, as we were ending our session, I asked if he could get a letter to my ex-husband and children. I said I wanted to apologize to them for all my actions throughout their lives. I knew that they would never forgive me, but I wanted them to understand that I was wrong, and I realized it, and I was sorry. As he was leaving me, he asked, "Do you feel up to seeing Ethan?" I almost screamed, yes, but then asked if Ethan would ever want to see me after all I had done to him. "He calls me for updates on your progress," the doctor admitted. "I know it's unethical, but I thought you wouldn't mind," he added, shrugging his shoulders. "I'll ask him next time he calls." I think it was about 2 weeks later that I was sitting at the small writing desk in my room when I caught some movement out of the corner of my eye. I looked and saw Ethan, the father of my children. He was holding a bunch of red roses. He held out the flowers and said, "They are from the kids and me." I jumped up, knocking the chair over, and then fell over it. I lay there on the floor, crying. He knelt by me, asking if I was okay. I nodded, crying even harder. Ethan helped me up and put the flowers next to my bed. I picked up the letter I was writing off the desk and started to read it out loud. "Dear Ethan, I am writing this letter to apologize for the way I have treated you and the children all these years." At this point, I stopped to dry my eyes. I was crying so hard I couldn't read the words on the sheet of paper. Ethan put his arms around me. "I know," he said. "Let's try to work it out. I know it will not be easy, but I have missed you these past years and want to try again. I've talked to the girls and they want to meet their mother again," he added. "I don't know if we'll ever be a family, but we'd like to try." I stayed at that facility and continued my talks with my doctor. Sometimes Ethan would join me and we discussed our problems together. I learned a lot about myself and how much I had hurt him over the years. After our talks, I would sink into a deep depression and my doctor would work to bring me out of it. It took almost 3 years, but Ethan and I finally resolved enough of our issues that I moved into his home. It was in Santa Monica. It was one of those multi-million-dollar homes on the ocean. I had my sad moments with him. There were nights I woke up to him tracing the scars from the whipping on my back. He'd be crying softly. "Why won't you let me have a plastic surgeon remove them?" he always asked. "They are my scarlet letter," I'd always answer. We'd spend the rest of the night making love and cuddling. My life was his, and I'd never forget it. My girls let me back into their lives. They both married and had children, giving us grandchildren to fawn over. We had another 10 years together when, one morning, he didn't wake up next to me. He didn't wake up at all. He died in his sleep. I held him in my arms and just cried. I must have made too much noise because our housekeeper came to investigate. She called 911 and my doctor and children. I don't remember much of the next few weeks. All I know is that my bed was empty for the first time in 10 years. My husband was gone and I'd never see him again. I tried to join him, but I woke up in the same clinic where I had stayed so many years ago. My doctor had retired and I was assigned to a young one. We talked, but I never really bonded with him. Eventually, they let me return to my island home. One day, I was standing alone on our deserted beach when I walked into the ocean. "Ethan, I'm coming to join you," I thought as I started swimming out to sea. It was cold, yet it was loving. It was deep, yet it was comforting. I kept swimming. I don't know for how long, but then it hurt. My arms were tired. My legs felt numb. It got harder to stay afloat. Then it finally happened. I saw him. He was there in the depths. I could reach him. I swam towards him. It was getting dark. Then, I saw the light. I wake up to the softest light, a gentle glow that seems to wrap around me like a warm embrace. It's unlike anything I've ever seen, neither harsh nor blinding, but soft, comforting. I feel weightless, as if I'm floating in a sea of clouds. My last memories rush back to me, the cold water, the frantic struggle, the darkness closing in. But here, there's only peace. I look around, my heart pounding, though not from fear. I know where I am, though I can't quite explain how I know it. It's as if my soul recognizes this place. It's heaven. Suddenly, I see him. Ethan, my Ethan. He's standing a few steps away, looking just like I remember him, with that familiar warm smile that always made me feel like everything would be okay. I can hardly believe it. Ethan, my heart swells with 1,000 emotions all at once, joy, relief, disbelief. Tears fill my eyes as I rush to him, and he wraps me in his arms. Oh, Ethan, I whisper, my voice trembling. Please, never leave me again. The words spill out of me, desperate and raw, the longing of all the years we've been apart, the pain of losing him all over again when I was still alive. He pulls back just enough to look into my eyes, his gaze steady and filled with all the love I've missed so much. I will never leave you, he says softly, his voice a promise that echoes through every corner of my being. And then he kisses me. Softly at first, then with all the passion and love we've been holding back. It's like we're rediscovering each other all over again, like every kiss we ever shared was just a prelude to this one. In that moment, nothing else matters, not the years of loneliness, not the pain, not the cold, dark water that pulled me under. I'm home. I'm where I'm meant to be, in the arms of the man I love. And I know deep in my soul that we will never be apart again. Thanks for watching. Could this story have ended differently? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories. See you next time.